the season. Kansas State has been, a little bit of a yo-yo. The tough, brutal loss at the end on the 61-yard field goal to Missouri. And then Oklahoma State thumped them a couple of weeks ago, but they came back to win in Lubbock. TCU this Saturday night on ESPN2. John Kurtz, KC Sports Network, joins us. John, great to have you on the show as always. Your thoughts about K-State with Avery Johnson and what kind of and I know Howard's going to play too, but what kind of a spark he's given that team?
Yeah, well, hey, guys, I appreciate you having me on. It has really added some new juice to the season that was much needed because I'll be honest with you, that Oklahoma State game, I think, was as poorly as K-State has played since they lost 45-0 to Iowa State during the COVID year in 2020. And it just had you kind of reevaluating where not only the season was going, but like, hey, what's going on with the program here? This is not supposed to be how this goes. I think a week later, you feel a lot better about that with Oklahoma State, obviously on the come up. I think Mike Gundy has really figured some things out. And now not only did K-State get a win, but you're starting to feel like, hey, here's a new guy that can elevate the ceiling of this season in Avery Johnson. And I think most people felt like that beforehand, but it was curious that the coaches decided not to play him at all against Oklahoma State, particularly Will Howard had a 70-yard run in that game. They were giving up some quarterback runs, so you felt like that could have been pretty effective there. But, I think the coaching staff has been careful about trying not to throw him into the fire and put too much on his plate early on, but he is as calm as it gets. And, we had him on our podcast earlier this week, and he speaks like a sixth-year senior. I mean, he does not sound like a freshman at all. I think he can absolutely handle it. And just being able to see the potential that he has, you realize that he could do a ton to help out this team, obviously not only this year, but the future of the program seems really, really bright with him at quarterback. So it's turned a lot of heads. It's made a lot of people feel better about what this team can do. And now you look at it, they've got back-to-back pretty manageable home games here against TCU and Houston before a road trip down to Austin. And if you get those couple of wins and really get rolling before you head to DKR, I mean, who knows? But I think you feel like now, hey, this team is still actually in basically the same position they were in last year. In fact, if they win those next two games, being 4-1 and going to play Texas, that's exactly where they were last year, 4-1 in the Big 12 and playing Texas. And we know how that worked out in the end.
John, so what do you think the future is for Will Howard? I mean, are they going to keep, ping-ponging back the quarterbacks based on the situation? He hasn't been the same since he got banged up in the Mizzou game, obviously. So does this allow him to get healthier and then you see Will Howard more, or is this a two-quarterback system going forward?
Kind of the $64,000 question right now. And I think it probably is to some extent a two-quarterback system going forward, which I know is a little bit dangerous and probably not what anyone really wants to hear. There are a lot of factors here. I mean, I think Will has gotten a bit of a bad rap this year because of some things systematically that were going wrong around him. I think the offensive line has been pretty inconsistent and a little bit disappointing after bringing everybody back. The wide receiver core has been very disappointing, and Keegan Johnson was supposed to be a real stud. He has not been able to do much yet. He's been slowed a little bit by injury. Just not getting much production on the outside to help out Will. And last year that was a lot different when you had Malik Knowles and Cade Warner, who was an underrated piece of that offense. And then obviously Deuce Vaughn too. I think when he had all those weapons last year, he was a guy that was fearless, not afraid to push it down the field, and it really worked out well. Whereas now, this year, you kind of need the Avery Johnson who can do a lot of the work himself and make plays happen himself because you're just not getting as much out of the skill guys. So that being said, Will has still not played very well, and he's turned the ball over a lot, and the offense just wasn't moving much against Texas Tech when he was in the game, so you absolutely had to go to Avery Johnson. It'll be really fascinating to see who actually starts, like who gets the first snap on Saturday, because in the past, and this coaching staff under Chris Kleiman, I would say that they're probably loyal to a fault. I think last year they got away with pushing Adrian Martinez a little bit too much after it became clear in Fort Worth that Will Howard was going to be the guy that would be better suited for that offense, and it almost burned them. I mean, I think that cost them the Texas game, and they still were able to make the Big 12 championship game. So they've been erring on the side of being later than early in situations like this before. I will say, however, the word has been very clear since day one. Like, they realize how special Avery Johnson is, and they know that he is a guy that has an unlimited ceiling and potential here. So that gives me a little more hope that they will roll with him to start and kind of let him take it and use Will Howard where they need, which I guess kind of reveals my opinion on where this probably should go. But I also would tell you, I think they will have to use Will Howard at some point this year, whether it be Avery Johnson hits a freshman wall somewhere, defenses, now that they have this much more tape to scheme against him, will kind of vex him at a point in the future, or there is, and I hate to bring it up, but there is always the possibility of injury too. And K-State, much like Texas Tech and many places across the league, has dealt with a lot of quarterback injuries over the last handful of years. So I still think he'll have a role and he will play, but my preference would be for them to let Avery really try to work this out and tailor some of the game plan around him this week. I'm a little 50-50 on whether or not I think that is going to be the case. We shall see on Saturday.
John, a little bit more on Avery Johnson. I mean, we've seen him throw it around a little bit, had the 9 passes, was 8 of 9, which is great for 77 yards, but obviously made his biggest strides in the running game with the handful of touchdowns, which was incredible. But how would you sort of profile his game? Since we haven't seen a lot of him up to this point, where are his strengths, in your opinion? Where's the passing game going with him at the helm? How do you see all that?
Yeah, I'm going to preface this by saying, don't hold me to like these comparisons that I'm about to throw out. The names that I'm about to use are like obviously like high end. But I think these are just like the most accurately I can portray like what the shape that I think the skill set takes. Like I think his skill set right now is the best comp that I've seen or heard is Lamar Jackson. Like I think he's just an elite straight line speed runner, and he is good at throwing the football. Like this is not just somebody who can only run the ball. And I was going back and looking at Lamar Jackson's stats. I mean, that dude actually threw for a lot of yards and was really productive with his arm in college, when I think people just think of the running ability. Avery can definitely throw the ball. I would encourage anybody that has questions about that to go look at his high school film. Now, if you go look at him making plays with his arm in high school, it's like the off-platform, like Patrick Mahomes arm angle, like that sort of thing that he's doing there. So again, like I realize the names that I'm throwing out there, I'm not proclaiming him to be either one of those guys, but if you want to know kind of the mold that he's in, that's it. And I know that he really wants to prove that he can do more with his arm at this level, because he told us that on the 3-Mile podcast earlier this week. He said, like, hey, look, I know that the rap on me right now is that I'm just a guy who can use my legs, but he can definitely sling it. And he had a great throw to Jace Brown as a freshman receiver that they got in the game late in the Texas Tech game. That was like a layered throw over a linebacker and dropped it right in.
Yep.
I mean, he can do it. He can do it. This is not, I mean, like K-State fans will remember like Daniel Sams when he was competing with Jake Waters at quarterback, and Sams had some stat lines like that, like 8 of 9 for 77 yards. I mean, this guy has more of an arm than Daniel Sams. He can absolutely be a threat. I think they just need to let him uncork it and use it, because again, I will repeat one thing that I've heard and I think is very apparent. They've been very cautious with him and trying not to get him into a situation that he can't handle here early on. But I think now the situation is really going to call for it. And you're probably going to have to let him do that. The other thing with him that's really helped, I think, with his skill set, Trayshawn Ward had by far his best game of the year on Saturday as a running back. I think because in large part, defenses were sucking in on Avery so much and so concentrated on that it freed up a lot of space for him too. So I think it really can just make the offense function a whole lot better if Avery is in there right now.
I'm about to tweet Kurtz, Avery Johnson compared to Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson.
Right,
just
that's
to fill up.
That's what he said.
I mean, that's exactly what I heard.
And Elvis, and the Beatles, all that.
Michael Bishop. So one of the things about him, and he's wiry and he's tough. So how do they handle him physically as he gets older in putting weight on him, more muscle than it is any kind of bulk?
Yeah, they definitely want him bulked up more than he is right now, although I will give him a ton of credit. So he got there in spring, and I mean, like when he got there, and again, I would say go look at his high school film and see how much skinnier he looked even last year and when he first got on campus than he is right now. Like he's bulked up fairly significantly from where he was at. He's just a slender guy naturally. So, I mean, I'm sure he's pounding protein shakes, milkshakes, everything they can get into him to try and put on some good weight. It'll be a matter of time with that, but, with that comes an obvious concern, and that is, can he take the kind of pounding that he took at Texas Tech on a week-in, week-out basis? I think they probably need to skew the run-pass ratio when he's in the game by like 10 or 15% more than what it was. Obviously more tilted toward the pass than the run, because you don't want to jeopardize that. You don't want to jeopardize him getting hurt. Now, I also think he's so fast and elusive. He has not taken a lot of direct shots so far. Like, it's tough to get a really good shot on him, but eventually, I mean, if you run him enough, K-State's learned that lesson over and over again. You run him enough, you will run into that issue. So it'll be an ongoing process for him. I'll be curious to see like how much potential there is for weight to put on his frame as he goes through his college career. But I can tell you this, he's going to do anything and everything he can to get there, because he's a machine. I mean, he is just like designed in a lab, everything you would want out of a quarterback, just in terms of being incredibly humble, leadership, coming in and working. I mean, we just heard that from the word go when he got in spring ball, that he was soaking everything up he possibly could, working the long hours, like everything that you would want in your leader and quarterback. That is definitely what Avery Johnson brings to the table.
What have you thought about the run game and how that's played out? I know that the injuries have also played a factor there, but a lot of hope for Treshaun Ward and Giddens as well. Just what have you made of what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I go back to, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but I do think the offensive line has left something to be desired for a large portion of the year. Now, they played their best game on Saturday against Texas Tech, and I say all of this, and if you go look at K-State's raw rushing statistics, they rank really high across the country, but I think a lot of that's been fueled by having to go to the quarterback running game, even when Will Howard was playing earlier this year, probably more so than they really wanted to. But they've been better in conference play. Obviously, the UCF game was great. DJ Giddens had an incredible night. I do think that DJ Giddens hasn't looked like he's had the same burst since that game, where he just took a boatload of carries, had almost 300 total yards and over 200 on the ground. So I wonder if maybe just some lingering effects of the beating that he took in that game. But it's been okay, because Treshaun Ward has had much more burst and looked a lot better in the last two games. He was one of the bright spots really at Oklahoma State. I thought he ran pretty well. So they're getting pretty good production out of those two. And I think they're good backs. Like, I think they're definitely good backs. It's just when held up in the reflection of Deuce Vaughn from last year, that's obviously pretty tough to replicate. And also, I would say, just holding them up against some of the backs in this conference. You know, I mean, Devin Neal, Ollie Gordon, like there are some Taj Brooks that K-State just saw on Saturday. Like, there are some really excellent running backs in this conference. So they may get overshadowed a little bit there, but no, I think they've been fine. And as long as they continue to find the hot hand and ride the hot hand, I think they'll be okay there. And it does feel like the offensive line is rounding into form. And I should mention, I mean, they had some injuries that they were dealing with to begin the year, particularly with Christian Duffy at right tackle, and that seemingly is short up now. So it would stand to reason that they're going to continue to get better and better.
John, what do you think about Jerome Tang hanging out with Deion Sanders last week?
Pretty perfect, right? I mean, that seems like a match made in heaven. And he did tell him in the clip I saw he was going to wear the shades to Big 12 Media Day, and obviously he followed up on that. So I love it. You know, I know it'll rub some people the wrong way, just like Deion does in general, Coach Prime, excuse me. But I think if you're looking at like what Jerome Tang tries to do, and he made it a big point to emphasize, like the reason he sought out Coach Prime to go meet him was because he wanted to learn about branding and marketing and how to best position K-State as, I think he said, like, hey, I feel like we're a national brand. We want to be a global brand. And so he thinks he's always thinking high. And he's trying to get some advice from Coach Prime on that. And there's nobody really better in the college sports world right now than him at attracting eyeballs. So it makes a ton of sense. I love it. I think it's what K-State basketball program is really needed. And I certainly will not fault Jerome Tang for that at all. I love having a coach. I mean, I saw a picture. I was not actually able to make it to Media Day today, but I saw a picture of Jerome Tang at his breakout session with, just a horde of media around him, and there was hardly anybody else at any of the other stations. And it just is still crazy to me to think, like, hey, you've got a coach that is that popular, that much of a magnetic personality, and has created this much of a brand in such a short period of time. So I'm all for it, man. That guy can do very little wrong in my eyes right now.
We brought up Brett Yormark and some of the comments he made yesterday. Craig did in a segment he did yesterday afternoon, and including the extending Kansas City as the home of the basketball tournament, which makes sense. I know there's always a little bit of the conspiracy theory because it's not fair to schools elsewhere, but there are even some incoming schools that are barking a little bit about, how about Vegas or whatever? I went on today and just basically said, listen, you can want Vegas, But unless you've been to Kansas City for that week, that tournament week, then you just at least need to experience that. And then if you still want it somewhere else, that's fine. But Kansas City, John, they do such a great job, so sell it again for those that don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess first of all, I would just say, like, if I were a Utah basketball fan, I'd probably be looking for something outside of the hoops to grab my attention for conference tournament week anyway. So the Vegas part makes sense. But no, I mean, Kansas City's great. Like, I selfishly, I live literally just a couple of blocks from Power and Light downtown and in Kansas City right now. But it's just a cultural event, you know, and you can say what you will about the home court advantage for like Iowa State, KU, K-State. That is true. But I know it was pointed out, like if you look at attendance over the last 10 to 15 years in college basketball, all those schools rank near the top 2. So it's not just that they are bringing fans because of proximity to Kansas City. It's because they have big, loud, passionate fan bases that care and that travel to see their team. And so when you have a hub like that and the entertainment district out there at Power and Light that people can just spill over to and from after the game, I mean, it just creates such a cool atmosphere. And I don't think you ever find cities that embrace it fully. I mean, it's cool to be in Barclays. It's cool to be in Vegas. But to me, that's kind of getting away from like the college feel. It's almost like, you know, you hear a lot of the arguments these days about like, and we saw some of this from like Pac-12 country about like, oh, these little dinky college towns, you know, who wants to go to Waco or Ames or whatever. And it's like, well, that's really actually what the college experience is about, is going to the college towns where everything is built and engineered around the school. And that's what makes it fun and a really cool environment and atmosphere and unique, and all the colloquialisms everywhere. So I think it's just kind of a microcosm of that, or an extension of that, with why Kansas City is so great as that sort of location, because it's a college sports town and has that sort of passion. And just, I mean, ask anybody that tried to, you know, I saw Dallas floated out there. It's like, you know, ask anybody that tried to go to Dallas for the Big 12 tournament when it was there, what it was like compared to Kansas City. I mean, there's just no comp. So I'm very happy to see it. I know Brett Yormark is an East Coast guy, and I'm sure there's probably a part of him that would like to get it out to Barclays or somewhere out on the East Coast, but it just would not be the same at all. And even if you did move it to Vegas, I mean, I sincerely doubt the Four Corner schools are going to pack a bunch of fans in there to recreate any sort of the environment that you have in KC. So I'm pro KC all day on that.
John, thanks for your time. Kansas City Sports Network, John Kurtz with a bunch of great stuff, was also really good.